on. There we go.
They should. Do you guys know Ian Hubert?
No, I don't.
He is a Blender magician.
Oh,
He,
the Blender guy, yes.
the Blender
Wh-
guy. Yeah.
Which is the guy who did that with the girls in
Yeah.
with this
Yeah.
one of the girl this thing. I was
That guy.
watching that and I was like, what the hell?
Yeah,
I mean,
and it's real time. You know that, right?
oh really? I did not know
It's
that.
it's rendered with Eevee. It's a real time renderer.
I
I'm
haven't
gonna
seen
have
it.
him. Yeah, I should send it. I'm now that we are still waiting. I'm co-chair of the virtual production summit that is happening in March for Sparks Effects, and
Okay.
I'm trying to get him on board to do a
Yeah.
talk. Yeah, this
Yeah.
guy is crazy,
I didn't
and he
know. And
models everything from photos.
yeah, I mean, I've seen his because he posts his tutorials and stuff, just like, this lazy blender things, and it's usually like,
Yeah,
it looks like, oh, that's like easy, and like you guys just like guys, sipping coffee and like, making dinner like on the side, you can just do those tutorials. But yeah, when I saw this, I was like, what an actual, which is proves my point. It doesn't really matter what software you're using, like, doesn't matter at all. Like, if you
no,
know what you're doing, you can do it like in, I guess, in your notebook and like, flip through and it will just like gonna look
yeah.
good because yeah, I
Yeah.
listen. But
I mean,
real,
obviously, he is amazing, and his speed is incredible, and he really knows what he's doing. Um, but yeah,
he
it
spent
it just
quite some
shows.
time,
Yeah.
right? He
Say it
spent
again.
like in Blender with like certain amount of years, I would assume. He's not
Oh
he
yeah, yeah.
didn't
He's
jump
like
like,
one. Yeah, no, no. He's been with Blender since Blender.
yeah,
Yeah,
so that's,
yeah, yeah. For a
it's
very
pretty
long
much
time.
like what's his name, is this Andrew, the main Blender guy who does all the tutorials?
Oh, Andrew
Yeah, yeah.
Price.
Yes.
Yeah,
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 I
yeah. Similar.
was I was in the army with him. What,
Oh really?
19 years ago? Yeah,
Oh.
Oh
we
crazy.
we were both similar personalities where we didn't quite we did not at all fit in with the mold of the army soldier. And because they just every second word is a swear word. And the more offensive the swear word, the better it was. And neither of us really fit in with that. And we we then, like, eventually we left. We parted ways, and about 5 years later, I bumped into him in all places at the international terminal in Singapore. And I was coming back from a job in Singapore where I'd spent a couple of months doing an animation, and he was coming back from seeing his now wife. And we were sitting in these chairs, like looking at each other, and I kind of looked at him like, and he was looking at me, and it was like this, that moment of like, you both recognize each other, but you don't want to be weird in case it's not the person you think it is. And like waving to somebody who you think is waving to you, but they're actually waving to the person behind you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um so yeah, and so we bumped into each other at the airport, and then discovered then at that point that we'd both gone into CG, and neither of us had any idea at the time of being in the army together that we'd go into that direction. Um, but yeah, he's so synonymous now with Blender that it's crazy.
Yeah, he is. Is he actually only doing the videos, or does he work somewhere?
He I'm not too sure because he's so busy that barely ever chat to him. But as far as I know, I think he does do a little bit of production stuff where it suits him, I guess. But I think the main thing is his website, and I guess also he does like speaker events now, and but I think he's kind of he's so knowledgeable about the software that he gets studios reaching out to him about maybe they want to do something but they can't technically get through a hurdle. He would certainly be the first point of call if I was trying to do something in Blender that, as a studio, that we couldn't achieve.
Yeah.
Um, cool. Okay, so Alex, you were saying just when we were offline for a moment there, that this competition has been a little bit like of a jump in complexity.
Yes, at least, yeah, that's what kind of my impression. I think, yeah, we jumped a little bit from being, more smaller and like a local to like, okay, here's multiple weeks and multiple stages. And yeah, I think people, my impression, people are a bit overwhelmed. And yeah, also like you said, Cyberpunk is everything was like night and shiny. It's tricky, and it requires a lot of work. And yeah, 2D is not, the easiest way. 3D would also, I mean, it would help, but you would still need to put a lot of work to basically make it work
Mm.
nicely. And yeah, I think maybe also this one, because it requires, or people decided to go with 3D full on. Most of the submissions I see, somehow they're utilized like 3D, or at least. And yeah, that also takes some part, unless uh it's basically, unless you are not, super familiar with 3D. It's always is like with anything else. Unless you basically master technical part of it, you cannot really go full on creative, because you still need to figure out the technical parts, which is, creative kind of job on its own. But say if you are like, Photoshop user for 15, 20 years, then you have no questions on how to basically, compose the image. Then you solve all the creative questions you have in your head and trying to do that. But if you're trying to basically mix something new to your pipeline, then you automatically start in kind of like lowering down the creative
Mm.
output, just because you're also spending time solving other kind of like puzzles, unless you know specifically, like from the 3D point of view, what you really need to just support your stuff. And you just figure it out, it's like, okay, I just need to, place the buildings so they give me the perspective, but I don't care like anything about rendering or anything about like lights, lighting in general. Then you still go and you do your 2D. But if you just like mix two things together, and matte paint on top, which is nowadays, it's getting, to me at least, more and more blurry for people with, between concept art and matte painting. Still a lot of people think matte painting is just, heavily polished concept art, which is not.
Yeah.
Technically speaking, if we talk about it from the point of like industry standards and point of view, it's still not the same, and it's different approaches. And yeah, that's kind of like my thoughts on submit. They're all great. I'm not saying there's a drop of the quality. I'm just saying it's a little bit of a feeling like, yeah, people got a little bit lost maybe, or didn't, you know estimate excuse me, properly,
Yeah.
how to basically, approach the task,
It's
maybe plan it.
it is definitely much more difficult than our typical sort of fortnightly challenges that we've done. Obviously, the whole idea was let's throw a big competition around cyberpunk, and so we wanted to raise the bar. But like I was saying in the break that we just had, cyberpunk and post-apocalyptic scenes are the two things that people want and love the most, uh, and yet they are unfortunately also the most difficult of the map paintings to do in terms of that pure 2D, and even in a 3D sense. Post-apocalyptic stuff requires a lot of destruction. So if you can use kit bash kits, but if that's kind of just speeding up the process. If you were really to do the whole job yourself, it's quite a lot of work. Um, Sep, from
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
please.
I was going to ask you, from your
Yeah.
experience, like what are your thoughts on it, and also is in terms of like matte painting and concept art, because that is something that's super common for people to think. Like I get it all the time, where either a concept artist will say, "Well, if I can't get into concept art, then I'll go and do matte painting," and I'm like, no. And then here the same thing on the flip side. If I can't, if it's not a matte painting, then it's a concept art piece. It's like, uh, so from your thoughts, what do you sort of go for in that regard?
In that regard, I see it as complete two different jobs. Like, to be honest, it requires a different education to get to either concept art or matte paint. I think that uh, the primarily thing of it is that you have two different workflows, and you have two different achievements that you want in the end. As a concept artist, if you're a good one, you need to be able to output 4 concepts a day, and you need to be able to really rapid prototype whatever your supervisor or director tells you. And you need to be able to really get this out, and bam, 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 you really need to bash it. And
Yeah,
it's not about creating photorealism, but just hinting it. You're just descriptive of what the vision of the director is supposed to look like. Or if the supervisor needs support, then they're there, and you're getting feedback, feedback, feedback until you hit the point, and you're ending up with like 100 versions within a very short amount of time, if depending on the project. And you don't consider any color spaces. You just work in sRGB. You throw in stuff. You're like quickly drawing in between, bashing some stuff, having some stamps in Photoshop, like all those kind of things, just to get the idea out. Because all you do is you're selling an idea in the end. That's
yeah,
what a concept art is supposed to do.
yeah,
So now, as a matte painter, you're not delivering 4 matte paintings a day. Depending on the complexity, you need a minimum of 4 days to get anything out. You have to deal with color spaces. You have to deal with projections that needs to happen in the end. You need to be very structured in Photoshop to prepare your matte painting so that later on, because after you're finished, it goes to compositing. They need to have the maximum amount of flexibility for little fixes here to major fixes. You need to work with other departments if you receive pre-renders from lighting, for instance. You need to work with them. You need to be super flexible in how you set up your Photoshop. But in the end, it needs to look absolutely photorealistic. It cannot look like anything. There's no painting and drawing in there. Rarely you use any brushes that have stamping or anything. Cloning is something where you're already like, oh God, there's a duplication that cannot be.
mm,
And you're thinking very photographic. Like in the end, it needs to look like a photo.
yeah,
The approach to map painting and the end result of map painting is very different to what a concept is supposed to be. And from my experience, it is also like two different types of personalities that work on either or. While
yeah,
I've seen concept artists that can also do matte painting, or matte painters that can also do concept art, but those are like super highly skilled and trained people.
yeah,
Like Alexei, he can do both. For him, there's no problem. He's just like,
yeah.
yeah,
Well,
that's
I
what
mean,
I think.
I
Yeah,
guess
but
within that, it's like
Kinda.
you're you're sacrificing being very specific on the one. It's like the jack of all trades kind of thing. You have to have the talent for both, but then you are giving up a certain sort of level of skill in order to pursue both. Um,
yeah,
your point about the photorealism is absolutely on point. If it doesn't look like a photo, then it's not finished, and that's where the massive hurdle of matte painting hits most juniors. The
yeah,
the only thing I'd say with that is that it depends on the context of the film, because you have matte painters who work in animation, for instance. Like I switched from VFX to the Lego Movie 2, and a matte painting for that was like it needed to be photoreal within the Lego world. So it was kind of like how do you do that? And I did find myself having to remove a lot of the photographic effects that like the noise, and they were always say to remove the detail for the matte painting. But it's if effectively like the only addition to that comment is whatever the context is that the matte painting is going into, it has to be photoreal to that context, which usually, invariably in the industry, is usually photographic, like real life.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, you will hear a lot that supervisors say, well, it doesn't look photorealistic enough. And, uh, and you will hear this all the time. And many times, supervisor cannot even tell you why. And they put it down to the artist to figure out why. And yeah, it's like a myriad of reasons of why something doesn't look real.
mm,
So for me, I always recommend everyone who wants to enter matte painting to obviously be a tremendously good artist, but also be a tremendously good photographer.
yeah, yeah. That's interesting because I do find that most matte painters have some interest in photography, and that's kind of where I started. Doing photography for architectural companies, creating the plates for them to put the CG onto. And it's absolutely like it's so beneficial to understand things like ISO, focal length, and the differences between what it feels like at 24 mils versus 50, and all of those little photographic things that happen that you almost, yeah, I mean, on the one hand, when using low grade photography, you have to remove certain things like chromatic aberration. But then on the other hand, you're adding in certain things like light wrap, especially if you're recomposing uh, a mountain range across a different sky. You've then got to grade the light. Um, but
Yeah, one thing, sorry to interrupt you, but
sorry.
the most important thing for every matte painter to understand is that your matte painting is supposed to look like that it was filmed with a film camera. So with an Alexa or with a
Mm,
Red or whatever film camera. So the more you understand about the camera and how cameras capture light and how the light comes on the sensor, the more you understand how this is happening, the better you are going to be in creating photorealism. Because if you just do a painting, it will always look like a painting. You need to create a painting that it looks like it was captured by a lens
mm,
through a
mm-hmm,
film back.
mm-hmm. Um, awesome. Well, with that, I'm gonna kick off the having a look at the entries. So I'll probably just do one, like look at one, and then if you guys on your screens want to look through the entries and just find one that you feel like you can give some feedback on, then we can kind of just go round robin and give a bit of feedback. Obviously, again, as Alex said, the challenge is kind of maybe a bit too much of a big step up. So I'm going to be a little more relaxed in terms of giving photographic feedback, but there are certain techniques that you can definitely use to improve some of these submissions. So let's have a look at this one. So for Sep and Alex, I'm now sharing my screen. So if you wanted to uh, see what I'm sharing, actually I can probably share with you guys. Yeah, I will share my screen with you guys, and then you guys can watch along with that.
Excellent.
Okay, so let's have a look here. So this is a really good reference plate. I think this is Paris. Um, and there's been some added elements in the background. This is obviously whip 1, so here as we come up to whip 3, because the obviously the first thing I notice is that it's been flipped across the middle,
Yeah,
with only a
classic flip.
few, yeah, with only a few elements to unbalance it. But I think, who is this? Posang Huang. Um, Sorry if I butchered your pronunciation of your name. But yeah, this is good because like this portion here is still distracting me, but in terms of creating a little bit more visual interest and unbalancing the shot, you've done well. And then this does still lead through to the middle section here. So I think this is going in a really great direction. Um, I'd like to see when you post a new version, I'd say it probably needs a bit more light added to it. Potentially like darken it down, bring in some more neon elements like back here, and possibly just break up a little bit more of this mirror effect through here. I would say, yeah. What do you guys? Do you guys have anything
Also,
you want
like
to?
what? Yeah, like first off, like when you mirror the city in the center, you need to watch out with the light, like whatever is on the right side in comparison to the left side.
Mm-hmm.
It is very overcast, so you may get away with it, but relighting this is going to be very difficult. And I see like very high-rise buildings on the horizon, but I don't really see many in the foreground, so it feels a bit disconnected.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like the very distant buildings here feel like we're almost on a different planet that has some massive mountain range that's rising up in the background.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Also, like a really harsh transition from the foreground, midground to background. The background is super hazed, so I
Mm-hmm.
don't really feel it in the foreground. So you want to like add that haze either everywhere, like Blade Runner style,
Yeah.
or remove the haze in the background.
A really great way of checking that is to either blur your image by 10 or 20 pixels, or create a black and white filter over the top. And then just sort of look through the image, just blur your eyes and just feel the black values and the white values, and you can kind of see that this, in terms of black values, is the only portion that your eyes really want to see at the moment. And then they start to sort of travel out to some of the brighter areas. Um, but yeah, so evening out that haze is a good point.
The brighter areas also, I mean, like, to me, like you guys said, it's a little bit like I'm not really digging the consistency, because I mean it could happen in real life and everything, but it's like you have this super busy city, then you have, for some reason, you have that whatever, like Ferris wheel, like right there is super bright, which is
Mm,
okay, you're just looking into this, maybe, I don't know, story point, could be. And then you have those smoke on the left hand side, which is also like, it's just like bits, like in pieces, but they're not connected. Like, you kind of like don't really see this being, you know, a consistent, city, how it would evolve from
yeah.
basically, starting into, it's like, okay, here's the downtown, and there, the downtown area, there is like, some docks and things, and you can probably say, I think it worked better in the previous iteration without those high
Yeah.
rises, because you can tell,
I was
okay,
just saying, like here, yeah, this one
Yeah.
looks better.
yeah, it kind of worked. It's still like that, the whatever, the maybe the Ferris wheel and stuff, it's still too overpowering for that distance and stuff, but that kind of like made more sense to me
Mm,
than you have this sticking out, like here and there, some high rises, and then it goes into completely like, oh my god, this is Akira sort of like
mm.
the background.
One thing that I like about this is if there was just a little bit more visual city through here, because at the moment it just feels like it ends. But if it disappeared like it does through the middle section, it would just really feel kind of ominous and really end like it's endless expanse. And then what you could do is, because these buildings give it a really cool futuristic scale, but they just don't really work in this composition. But I imagine like if you were to build this sort of section up here just on the right hand side over here, it would sort of build it up like there's something huge over here, and you'd probably need to add some of these high rises in in the midground as well to sort of build up the hierarchy towards that epicenter. But then it would kind of feel like there's there's a growing city and we're sort of looking along the tangent of the CBD, which is on the right hand side, and then it just is this endless sprawl of buildings out to the left.
Yeah.
Cool.
Also, like with the version before, just to like wrap it, I like how we said it multiple times, like how those lights in the background are coming up. You know, you feel like that we're like dawn to night happening, but none of this is happening in the foreground.
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Like I don't see
Exactly.
the street lights or
Yep.
anything, so it's like
Yep.
feels a bit still disconnected.
That's one of the things that doing a day to night, which essentially this is, because it's clearly daylight enough that there's not enough street lights and lights just lighting up the buildings. I don't see any of the lights. There's some minor lights down in the buildings, um,
Yeah.
but so that's where when you do a day to night conversion, you have just so much work in a scene like this. You have so much work to add those lights back, that it's because the thing is this element in the background here is concept art. It's clearly a shot of a city at night that's been overlaid and or soft light or something. But you might get away with it in the background, but as you come forward, all of these streets are going to have to be lit respective to the angle of the street, and the actual windows will have to match up. Um, it's quite a bit of work. Cool. Okay, next one. Have you guys found anything that you want to share?
I'm still looking through some of the submission before I make a decision. There are definitely some interesting ones
Cool. Actually,
in there.
Alex, if you
Yep.
wanna, while Seb, we'll give Seb a minute to look
Mm-hmm.
for something. If you wanna have a look at this one here, I can.
Yeah, this was actually one of my favorites.
Yeah, it looks really good.
Yes, this one I also have. I have it like one open in one of my tabs, which is, and it's great because to me it really works as a thumbnail. Like if you
Mm,
see it a small one, you already like there is no questions like what you kind of have a feeling already of the shot. So you just like okay, you understand what's happening, and then you go to the full screen and you still understand what's happening with everything.
mm,
Yeah, so I like this one. I like the mood, so it's kind of like it hits this neon vibe to me, so I'm kind of like okay, this is yes kind of like cyberpunk things with colors and pretty much all the major things. Like there is a big city on the background, there is some sort of like a dystopian, so it's a little bit like a grungy but sort of like still kind of like colorful. It's not
mm,
like post-apocalyptic. There's like no zombies or anything. Like you wouldn't expect anything like this. Um, in general, I think it's a good start. It's to me this is a perfect example of it's a good work, but it needs way more time to finish to
mm,
make it really work. You have to spend a lot of time because there's so much going on. You basically can go and it's all great, but it's all can greatly be improved, but you
mm,
just need
mm-hmm,
time because you have to go like the stuff on the foreground, like okay, it's there, but then you need to add a lot of details and you need to have the clarity of like there's some scale because that's like the massive to me feels like at least there is a massive the size of some elements. I mean, it's also
mm,
like super wide lens, which is it helps with the environments like this, and that's going back to the Sep's point. If you're a photographer, you know which lens would be better for what type of the shot you're trying to do. You also know how it works in terms if it's a long lens, everything is compressed. If it's a short lens, everything is like super spared apart. All on your sides is going to be a perspective basically changes, and it's all going to be like, it's not going to be straight unless you like straighten it up afterwards for whatever purposes. But so you have to pay attention to that as well, which is in this shot. It's like the angle and the lenses, like, to me, works perfectly. It shows it's something big. It's like this like dark sort of like outskirts of like this whatever neon city, and the city on the background kind of sells
Mm.
the thing. So I pretty much, I like everything. It's just, if I would start giving notes, it would be like, I don't know, like a half an hour of just notes, because you can go through everything just because you want it to be finished, because there is so much potential to me. Like
Yeah.
you can have a really nice piece with this. It's just, it's not easy. It's like Seb said, if you're a professional, like, at least you have like 3 4 5 days. Like, there's no such a thing as like 1 day DMP, even like for super experienced people, unless you just basically merging stuff on top already pre-made, and you just like blending it and like color correcting. Okay, you
Mm.
can do it like in a day. But for the stuff like this from scratch, and you have to kind of like, you have to spend. It's the only thing is, oh, I guess it's the reflection, because I just noticed on the left hand side on the top, I think it's a reflection on the ceiling.
Up
But
here.
because of that weird pattern, I thought it was like the sky seen through, and I couldn't just
Mm.
understand what's happening with that.
I think
But
that's graffiti up there.
I
But
guess,
Yeah,
there's
or like almost like a transparent. It
yeah,
like almost looks like a display, like a transparent element, because the lamppost goes through it.
yeah, and
I
this reflection is not accurate because it's perfectly reflected
Uh,
to extent it
I
should
think
be
I'm
coming along.
expecting an angle being between the ceiling and the wall from the store, and I don't see it, and it kind of like makes me wonder
yeah,
what's going on, because
Yes.
you sort of like, I think it's curved, but if it's curved, you don't see the curve as well. So that's the only piece, the only part which is, I'm kind of confused with the image. Like, I don't really
Yeah.
understand what's going on. Other than that, I think it's pretty solid piece. It's just needs to, you need to keep going, and yeah, you're gonna be there. But you have to then pay attention to, like, you have to have in the piece like this, from at least my kind of point of view and experience, you have to have a lot of references. So you always have to go back and forth between the references and your, in terms of like detail, and in terms of like how the stuff reacts, especially with a lot of light. It's very tricky to kind of like keep everything in mind, and because if you miss some stuff, like, you think it's okay, but your brain still will notice like discrepancies, because it's just how we work. And like, you just have to have a bunch of pieces you're kind of like looking at and trying to recreate. That's what essentially that would be. To break it, to bring it to final, then you have to kind of like put it everything together, and then bring into the references, so you can cut the part of the image and put it next to your reference, and
Mm.
see, okay, I'm there, or okay, here's what I need, or what's the difference. Because with at full CG shots, it's always the problem, unless it's all like, over the time you start loving your shot no matter what. You just basically kind of like everything comes together. But when you put it against the actual real photo, then you see, and it doesn't really matter, it's a city or it's like a landscape, you see, oh, that's what's actually going on, and oh, this is how far I am, or no, I'm really close in this one, but just need to add this and that. So
Mm.
references, I guess,
Um.
I also think that it would really help. Look, because one of the few shots that I see here as entries that simulates like this wide angle lens effect. So, and if you understand wide angle lenses, let's say that this is like 14 mil here on a full frame film back, you definitely want to see the distortion. So
Mm.
all those lines that we see right now, they're all way too straight. They look very CG. So the moment you get a distortion out of it, then you get already like the feel of a real camera. And then with that, you also get more distortion on the sides. You definitely get more blurriness on the side, because wide angle lenses are always blurry on the edges. You will get a little bit of a vignetting for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you pump it in here, you see like what it does, like you really want to see the stretching happening.
yeah.
Yeah.
And because everything is so wet in the scene, you also want to have a little bit of something on the lens that helps that.
Yes.
I'm not saying like you want a raindrop here,
Mhm.
but you want something that affects the lens because the camera reacts under the weather, and
Right.
it's not like always like taking perfect images. And then with the wide angle lenses too, you should also consider about the defocus, because if you would
Mm-hmm.
shoot as a real DP for film, you would shoot this at 2.8 because that's the lowest your camera can do with a high ISA 800 or something or higher. And that means that your depth of field is super shallow.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
So whatever is there in the background needs to be blurred to a, not like defocused, but
Yeah.
it
It
needs
because
to be a touch.
the focal
You know,
point's just definitely here, I would say,
yeah.
as a story point. There's something in here that's being framed, and potentially this character is coming in. Who knows? So I would say the character it's himself should be slightly blurred, and it would be pretty subtle. And anything beyond that, I mean,
We're subtle. Like we're looking here at, but the eye understands that,
yeah, yeah. There was something else I was going to do to this, but I can't remember. But I just wanted to apply that distortion to really show how it adds energy to the shot as well, because you're getting away from that regimented straight line CG feel. Um, one thing that bugs me, and it didn't initially, I thought it was really cool, but it's starting to bug me, is the framing of the city in the background. It would be, I think at least, it would be better if we had some of these buildings that were like this wide and just continuing out of the frame. Because what we're getting here is this perfect city where we're getting all of the whole frame of the city in the shot. Whereas if you look at actually Raphael Lacoste is really good for this. His work, the way he frames some of the structures that he puts into his scenes, he'll hang on, let me find it. Lacoste. Uh, he often has elements continuing out of the scene. So something like this, you've got the city here on the right that's going out of the scene. It really helps to bring scale. This is an even better example here. But there is sh- um, one particular artwork that he's done, which has this big foreboding building sort of floating thing above. Here it is, this one. So this image here is perfect. Where is it? This one here. So you get the sense of this building. You're also then told basically what the final shape of the building might be by these indications in the background here, and then you get these huge scale, and it really feels foreboding and epic. So that's what I think you could do here is you could actually make those much closer, use much bigger buildings and really make you feel like you're like lost in this world.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So like as a really good reference for that in terms of understanding scale and like big high rises is Hong Kong. So if
Yeah,
you're on Kowloon side and you look to the other side in the financial district, and there you have all those high rises, um, that is like huge buildings, like they're like going up because they're all like super high rises. So um, they would all look bigger, even though they're like, see, when you look at this, like
yeah,
the first picture already, like, yeah, some of like this, you see those buildings and they're like, we're talking here. So which one is it? Um, like those buildings are partially 400 meters tall.
yeah.
Um, some of them, yeah, just to give you a good example here.
I mean, like some of these kinds of scales is what
Uh,
what we're getting at, but obviously from ground level.
yeah.
Although actually,
Let me have a.
yeah, if you want to share your screen set, feel free, and I can switch to
Let
showing your
me.
screen.
Yeah. Let me have a look. Because I went to Hong Kong for Ghost in the Shell and spent nine weeks there photographing the city.
Right. Yeah.
So I feel very connected to the city, and let's see what I have.
I mean, even just while you're
In
looking for
my
that, even this building here, if we
Yeah, and the
like,
compression. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. If we flip that around the other way, the perspective, I don't know if this perspective of this would work, but that might, yeah, that, I mean, that could work in uh, in the background here. We paint this in here. Might be a bit too big at the moment, but we're just looking for, we're basically just looking for elements that
Hmm.
like imply scale behind the scene. So, properly grading this in and something like that. Um, yeah, have you found some images, Seb?
yeah. I'm just looking at Ghost in the Shell because this is where, also like where we did the cyberpunk
Yeah,
theme, and like how the city felt, because it was all in the movie, that it was all like let me open the link.
See, that's another point.
Like
It was all based on something real, which is you're not inventing stuff from scratch. You just like, because
mm,
it's not an impossible task, but it's really tedious. But then what's not tedious, but like it's pretty difficult. But if you have stuff, it's like you said, no, like Guillaume used to say all the time, like it has to be based on something, and then you can build on that, and then you have a level of believability of the image right away, just because you're already following some patterns, you're already following some design ideas, or like it's not just like going. That's why building cities from scratch as a 3D thing, it's, god, I don't know, it's impossible.
yeah,
So
exactly.
much.
Yeah, I'm like anything I do, I I do from photos. Like
Yeah,
everything I do is based off photos. Like when I was still matte painting, like full time, and back then internet search in Google was very limited of what you got, and in particular high resolution images. So what I did is I went out
yeah,
and took photos, and I photographed them specifically for the shots. And in every city, you can find something. There is a high rise in every city, like unless you're in a village. But in
mm.
general, you can find, or like if you're like in places like something has ended now.
Yeah, I think it just, I think the screen share just broke, but yeah, I just restarted the screen share.
Yeah. I found the Ghost in the Shell sequence. I can
Yep.
quickly share my screen and then point out to like what we did here. And so I just need to figure out how do I screen share your screen. Okay, let me quickly do that. And then how does it work? Oh, yeah. There we go. You guys tell me if you see what I'm seeing. If it works somehow or not. My connection somehow is a bit slow, so I don't know.
Yep.
Connecting.
Yep. It's connected now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you see the scene?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is like in Ghost in the Shell. They are on the boat and they have like their moment there, and in the anime is where she goes scuba diving, and so the city here in the background, this is all real photography. This is all filmed either with a helicopter or photography that I did. And then MPC Montreal went in and enhanced it, and they added all that stuff to it. But here you can see that compression of those buildings, like how stacked they look and how many buildings there are. So it's not just like a few buildings here and there. It's like really is massive. It's like you can't even see the roads. So this is just like this really cool. Let's see if I can play this here. Unfortunately, it doesn't play. But I think like if you add this here a little bit more compression to the background.
We don't see your mouse, by the way.
I know.
Um,
Yeah, my it's very here we go.
There we go.
Slowly plays. I don't know why it is so slow. Let me see if I go through. Yeah, here, and here's also like the lens effect.
Mm-hmm.
You know what you get, the defocus. So I love bokeh. Like I'm a huge, you know, I love how this looks. So, but yeah, there's compression there happening in the background and the lights and so on. I think it would really help to define that background there a little bit more.
Can you pause on this? I want to also say like the cyberpunk feeling relies a lot on that like dense scattering of light. So all of those blue neon lights have this glow around them, which is super cyberpunk. And I think that's what, but also that like it's not lifting the black levels overall. It's just glowing around the light sources. So when we compare that to, if I just quickly switch back to the submission we were looking at, we can feel like the whole environment could have the black levels dropped to feel a little bit more like real dark nighttime. And then add in those neon glows, or just localized glows. So no, that reference was awesome.
It is a very fine line with the lights. Yeah.
Now when you switch, and when I especially switched from the Ghost in the Shell to this one, I see even more the lack of contrast on the foreground you would see. And that's another thing, like if you spend a lot of time, and if you don't go and see like references and go back and forth, you won't notice this. You would be like, okay, I'm doing this, and you kind of adjust to everything because you evens out, kind of like your mind evens out everything with the image. But now when I go, it's like, oh yeah, I really want to bring like the area where the arrows and coffee thing, I really want to bring the contrast, like crunch it. Then you even have like more attention to this, and then you still have like a bit more contrast overall, and like with the city, because the city definitely needs more. And I think if we imply it's haze, then the haze would also sort of scatter light, right? So it's going to be like halos and things like around.
Yeah, and it would even light up the clouds on the top.
Yeah, right. That's true.
You know?
I think
remember when we did the city belt for Batman versus Superman, when we built Gotham City, which is also a little bit like, it's more gothic, but it's also like all those lights there. And one of the important part was that the clouds above are lit up from the light that pollutes up. And super interesting to see, because there's a little flat at the
Yeah, I think what's happened back here is that's just a single photo. There might be a couple of photos on the left here and the right, but that's just one photo. I'm pretty sure it's Dubai. So I mean, to bring it to what we would call cyberpunk, it definitely needs some of that more. Like Dubai's really dry, so that's why there probably isn't any cloud over the top of that, and it's all just sea salt and dust, and sand that's down around the bottom. Okay, cool. Let's move on. Let's have a look at this is Zoe's submission. So Zoe's been part of the MattePaint Academy for quite a while. We've had some mentoring sessions together, and she has, here's her mood board. She's got some really good style, and I feel like for her it's just a matter of time before she gets to that critical point of skill. Because I look at some of these thumbnails and I like this one in particular is super cool. Like the contrast and the way it leads your eye out to this symmetrical, but it's not symmetrically framed, but it's a symmetrically built architecture. I think it's really cool, and I think she's continued with this one up here, which is probably more achievable in the time frame.
I think
Yeah, I
somebody
agree.
did
This one
number
is a good one.
So go
Oh,
on.
sorry, yeah. Oh, Sep, because yeah, sorry, I interrupted. Sep, what were you
Yeah,
saying?
no, I like the contrast too there, what you said there. I wish she would have
Yeah,
done that one.
Yeah.
yeah. Well, I think she's watching, so she might decide to take this one and maybe make it into a matte painting that's not cyberpunk, because that's Paris. That's the
Mhm.
road that leads away from the Eiffel Tower. So she's
Yeah,
used the photography, which is it's actually really clever way to do it, because you're removing everything that distracts you from how realistic it could be when you start to merge different photos together, and you see it's like the uncanny valley, where instead of seeing how cool and realistic it could be, you start seeing like, it doesn't match up in perspective, or the colors don't match. um,
Mhm.
but this, and the foreground image is actually from Dubai, looking down uh, an elevated position at a aquarium glass wall. So that's really cool. You could actually
yeah,
take those two elements and merge them.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, so let's see. She said here she chose one of the thumbnails, and she created a rough base, kit bash, and retextured some of the buildings. So here we've got Geo. That's really cool. Um, so she's used it looks like this is from Brazil, from Rio. And then she's used a couple of those. That's actually super cyberpunk. If you just add all your neon lights and some of this design is would be really cool. Cool. And then so here's where she's gone with the CG. Cool. I'd say the design of this CG, not that like it fits the world, but it's like a brutalist style cyberpunk. Very like heavy duty, almost industrial sector.
I have a
Yeah, I agree.
Halo vibe, some sort of,
Uh-huh. Yeah,
which is
Yes.
not cyberpunk, right? But it's
Yeah.
like it's it's a solid sci-fi, but it's not a cyber. I
Yeah.
think.
yeah,
Something I want to address is with the color of the clouds and the mountains back here, as well as the scale and the lineup of the horizon. So here, if you ignore the foreground, Zoe, you can see that these clouds look like they're very much in the foreground. They look like they're almost right above us. But then the clouds down here also look like they're only a kilometer away. So just make sure when you work on this, grab the bottom edge of the horizon line of the clouds and just line it up to the horizon line in your image, and then scale the clouds from there to fit. So that will make it feel like they're actually going behind the mountains. And then the color cast of the mountains is clearly the image was on a blue day. So this blue sky, see how it matches, that it's reflecting the sky's color. So when you've obviously, I know you're still working on this, but you want to bring in more of that warmth and suck out some of the blue to get the yellow and the magenta. Um, and then that will start to really marry the two together. Um, cool. And then we're actually looking at not her latest
that's the latest.
submission.
There
So
it is.
here we go.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I think, yeah, she's done a little bit of work on the color grading there. I think it could be a little further, but also I can see if I can zoom in, yeah, there we go. So there's a blur along the mountain ridge, which shouldn't be there. if there is a slight softening of any mountain ridge, it should be like sub 1 pixel. Um, so yeah, do you guys have any comments on this latest version?
I mean, it's definitely an improvement to what we just saw. Like one thing that I fully agree that it looks brutalist. It looks a lot concrete. So when I think of Cyberpunk, I rather have glass
Mm.
and metal and aluminium in my mind than concrete. And because of all the concrete feel, it turns very monochromatic in general. Like, even though we have like light hitting and stuff like this, and it breaks it up, but yeah, it feels like all very monochromatic, the whole thing. And I think that Cyberpunk is more color. To me, it is a lot of color.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
It definitely feels more sci-fi than cyberpunk. I still think that generally it could go in that direction, but what she needs to do, I think, is potentially remove some of these extra elements on these buildings and just make them office windows, but also more of these sort of, I mean, this is a hologram, but maybe more like you said, glass neon panel signs, and just plastering them down all of these flat faces. Because when I think about cyberpunk, I also think about a world where everything is marketed to you. Everything is in your face, like here, buy our thing, augmented reality. Um, you know, here we'll stick a chip in your eye so you can see everything in the world. So I think about constant signs everywhere.
Yeah, it's basically, I mean, from my understanding, if you look at that cyberpunk, that's the futuristic version. What is this, Shibuya district, right, in Japan? When you go, and there's like crazy amount of signs, and then you go, it's like, okay, in the future they don't waste, or they don't have like more space anymore for this kind of like signs on the buildings, but they have a technology, and then they're just like, oh, we have a hologram, so we're gonna like basically polluted with the holograms, everything everywhere. That's
Mm,
what basically was in the Ghost in the Shell in the movie, where you go through the streets and it's like you cannot breathe without it. It's like everywhere. It's like from every shop just jumping in and just like, okay, buy this, like you said, buy that. Things. Yeah, this is basically the
yeah.
futuristic version of this kind of, which
Yeah,
is
yeah,
you have to add it more, and you have to have crazy variety, because this is different shops. It's not one corporation doing this, like, oh, we're doing only this and this is all lined up. It's, I don't remember, I think it was Michael Hill. I think it's Mike Hill, right? In his one of the presentation was saying like, to add the believability, you have to have a good design and the bad design as well. Because if you have only the good
Mm,
design, like you don't, like you see on the streets, also the bad design as well. Like it has to be something you just like, oh my god, Comic Sans, seriously, guys, you did this. So like, yeah, somebody did it. Somebody decided it's a good choice. Somebody like, oh, I don't know, didn't have enough money, or like, bought a crappy like light or something like this. So it has to be variety in styles, scales, and like, the quality as well, like something posh. Like we have a spinning, figures, and somebody's like, oh no, we're just projecting like a, wrongly scaled JPEG on the wall, basically, because that's what we can afford on. And then
yeah.
you have all the varieties of.
Ian's brought up a good point where he says Judge Dredd is a bit opposite to an extent, but he still thinks it's cyberpunk. And I'd say yeah, like what is Judge Dredd? If it is kind of cyberpunk, but it's also something else.
I mean, it's dystopian, but like, do we like? I don't know. Like, is cyberpunk is dystopian in a way? Because
no, I don't. At least I don't see it like this.
No, I don't think so.
yeah,
Yeah.
because
I think that
to me
Judge
it's,
Dredd is more brutalist.
Yeah.
yeah,
That is like hard architecture,
It
yeah,
concrete.
Yeah, it's just not a theme. Like you don't think, oh, it's a cyber. You don't think, oh, I'm gonna go and watch a brutalist movie. That kind of sounds like an R-rated bash 'em up.
For
But
for sure, for sure. But
yeah,
I mean, it is dystopian.
yeah, it is
That is,
definitely. It kind of like
yeah.
I think of Total Recall, the original one, as uh, as sort of verging on. I mean, maybe I haven't really looked at it in a long time, but verging on cyberpunk, like this for a 1990s idea, I would say is pretty much in that direction. The remake was certainly much more cyberpunk, but still like quite brutalist as well, because some of the construction, they were obviously leaning off the 1980s architecture, which was a little bit more sort of chunky concrete. When was the remake? 2012? See.
Must be 2000. We worked on it 2000. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, like I would say this is like dystopian cyberpunk, which I guess exists, but it's hard to really say where the line gets drawn. I'm trying to
Well,
find a
with the
good.
Total Recall, I mean, as far as I remember, talking to people at DNIC, the way Total Recall Australia looks differently because it's not supposed to be Australia in the first place, and it was a change in the creative decision later on. But they just couldn't, like, it does, like when I was watching in the theater and they were like, okay, Australia, like a title, I was sitting and like questioning, like, what? To me it looked like it's an Asian city. It's like a
Yeah.
Hong Kong sort of a play, which is apparently was the case in the beginning. They didn't go for it at the end for whatever reasons, and then they had to change it and do some kind of like a version, like ver- Western part, like, or Western, like, style into it, which is to me kind of didn't work. But it wasn't, the company's fault or anything like this. It's
Yeah.
just like, it is how it is. It's a part of the business. But it's more, I think, yeah, playing sort of on, kind of like, you can see, okay, they did it because they overgrown, right? Like, there is a clear idea why did that happen, which is sometimes when you do. And the same like with the Tokyo cyberpunk, like Tokyo already big, and you have to know Tokyo. It's like, say, like Vancouver. Why Vancouver has such a high rises in downtown? Because Vancouver, it's on the water. You cannot, like Toronto, spread it. Like, you have to
Hmm.
know you have a limited amount of land, then you go up. Same in for Japan, right? We're going up because we cannot go wide. Otherwise, we would go wider, like nobody cares. It wouldn't be like such a thing. So
Yeah.
you also kind of have to, when you do this stuff, if, like, to sell this story, you have to kind of like do the hint, why did that happen? Or at least, it's obvious for the viewer. It's not just like, that's what the problem with the first image, right? When we said, well, there's no consistency because you don't understand why is it all combined that way. So
Yeah.
to me, this one, it looks like, oh, okay, we kind of established, the base somewhere. That's what
Yeah.
I have a feeling.
I would I
It's
would I would suggest for this piece would be to make it later in the evening. Get like a post sunset sky in there where there could still be some light in there, but give yourself an excuse to add more night lights and bring more darkness into the scene to then light it up with lights. That would be my thing. Um, but yeah, definitely, like as it is. I mean, technically speaking, she's doing a really great job of matching the elements and sort of bringing in some composition here. It just is a little bit brutalist, but I think in the remaining week that we have, I would just say maybe some more simple and more marketing advertising style uh, banners and things all over the city, and then also adding in, you could really light up some of these areas down here and make them look like a district of shopping, or some activity down there where people want to congregate. um Cool. Do you? I've got one more submission here, but have you got a different submission that you'd want to look at, make some comments on, Alex? Oh, hang on. I think your microphone's just stopped working.
Oh, sorry.
There
Yeah,
we.
I found one. from Sean, which is I think uses the same idea what Zoe had in one of her sketches, but it's more um, straightforward view. It's if you go into submissions, it would be uh, actually quite.
See if I
It's
can find.
almost at the end. It's like where one the submission with the two fish, like red and green,
All
and one
right.
on top.
See if I can find it. Maybe you can guide me.
Okay, so if you go down, 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 like very, very, very like on the down of this, see up,
Oh,
and
this
then you
one.
see fish. No, no, the one on top. Yeah, this one.
This one. Oh, yep,
Yes, the
yep.
green one. So I think this one reminds me of one of the the sketch number 4 from Zoe.
Yes, yeah.
And but you can tell this one is less dynamic just because it's all kind of like straight lines and layers. So
Mm,
that one had more interest in terms of the foreground because the angle is a little bit like less usual than this one. This one is more like it's the classic if you remove the foreground, I would say it's the classic establishing shot for
mm,
when you
mm-hmm.
just like, okay, here's the city. And it also kind of like it's a good to me. My problem with this one is those ancient temples are quite not working
Mm,
as
mm-hmm.
it is. They need to be alternated quite drastically because it's
They feel
I
like
mean I
Gotham City.
it
A
would
bit.
be a cool idea. The good reference for this is oh my god, that was the cinematic from Unit Image, one of the games. The second part, it's like it was with the monkey and the chase. I don't remember if I can
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
find it.
That video game, was that for the video game?
Yes, and it was if we
What was
let
it
me
called?
see if I can meanwhile find it on Unit Image website. And
Um, yeah. While you're looking for
yeah,
that, there's two things that really bug me about this. One is the obvious is the rain, because it's just so obviously a filter or some layer that's added on top. If you were to if you wanted to have rain in there, it would you'd need to start adding heaps and heaps of reflective specs, like especially for Cyberpunk, it would need to reflect all of the lights, and you would get this really highly reflective watery scene. My suggestion would just be just leave it out, like because it doesn't add anything, just adds a lot of work to do. And then the other thing, and obviously I think this is pretty uh, early stages for him, but the the values through this middle section and probably elsewhere as well, there's some pretty heavy clamping and clipping going on. So you can see here, like, and there's just no real detail down there. So that's the main offender. But there's a probably a lot of little things out here that are clipping. I mean, this is also very concepty because you've got this
yeah.
roadway here, but doesn't actually match the underlying thing, which is fine. But hopefully, he has the time to improve that.
I sent you the link in the chat if you can open the art
Yeah,
station.
Beyond Good and Evil. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That was a good one.
Yeah,
I'm just trying
So
to open up some of my photos from Hong Kong that we can look at for reference.
awesome.
Um, I just, for some reason, I have a very slow connection today. I don't know why that is the case.
so you see you have like this kind of mix of
Yeah,
architecture with like ancient one, and also it gives you a feeling like it's the some sort of big city, but
yeah,
it's kind of incorporated those pieces and added like some holograms and some elements, which is like they're all combined. They can be together, which is so it's doable. We just need to kind of like put
Mm,
again a little bit of design into this, and the story why did like it could be like those islands of like ancient temples. They could be, you just need to be then either isolated and somehow like augmented, so okay, there was those pieces and now they built the city, and this city evolved, and it's like 30 centuries later they still have those like monuments, but they also have all this kind of like cyberpunk going on.
mm-hmm.
And to me, like right now, they're a little bit kind of like, a little just tiny disconnected. So I
Uh,
don't really
Mm.
buy the idea being the one environment.
Yeah, I definitely
yeah, I
prefer.
also like those.
You go.
Yeah, those temples also are like really dark,
Yep.
and they feel like backlit. And then you have those big temples in the horizon. They're a lot brighter.
Oh
Mm.
yes. Yeah, that one is like
Y-
it has to be blinding light
Yeah,
on the ground.
and in the foreground, completely dark. Um, it would suggest a different light situation.
Yeah. The it's something that could really turn this around is again using these buildings as frameworks for neon signs and neon
Hmm.
marketing and all of that. And you could even like you could sell the story as this ancient civilization existed here, but then humanity got, technology and they just accelerated so quickly that these buildings still exist and they're now just like using them as like marketing material. Um, so, because
Yeah.
you could plaster, and especially in this darkness, this element here is what I keep looking at because there's so much contrast around it, and you could bring a lot of visual interest with lots of uh, micro signage down on the bottom, and then like this could have this massive banner that's that's basically the biggest company in the world that's paid for that, and they're trying to advertise to like everyone who's standing up here and anyone that can see it, and that would just help to uh bring some context to those, because I feel like in a futuristic society like this where something existed from back in the religious ages, uh you they would either knock it down because they didn't care about it, or they would use it as something like as some kind of frame for an event or marketing, that sort of thing.
Also, which is again, we so circling back to that point, exposure of the photo and like how elements are exposed with the certain light, and what's going on with the photo in general, or with the matte painting in this case would be in general. Like you have to pay attention to what's the exposure, what's the element clarity of elements, contrast of the elements as well, which is again, it helps if you just grab the camera and go take your shots. Doesn't really matter of like no specific like architecture, it's just certain light conditions, and then you see, okay, this is how the light reacts, or not like how light reacts, how also the camera like gets it, because even it's tasks for the lighting, like, and for the dop and everything. If we are doing exposure for the characters, right? So everything else could be like blown out to the sky, just because the characters has to be well lit. Same thing if for environments, because it's like a different thing which part of the environments you want to show, on which part of the environments you're exposed, like your exposure has to be pretty much to the level so you can see those ones, which is in this case it's a little bit all together to me. Like you, like, yeah, the main thing is like you don't really believe it was shot in camera, like, right?
Mm.
Like you can
Yeah,
tell
no, I think, yeah,
it's an illustration or something, or
yeah,
it's a good like concept art, but you don't believe it was shot in camera, which is that's the main goal of the matte painting. It's like, oh, really? Is it a photo? It's like, okay, you cannot, not because of the details or architecture even, that is just because the photo, graphic aspects, technicality of it. Just it's media.
I think also what goes back down here is, and I see this with the submission as well, and I've had this so many times or throughout my career. I always tell my matte painters to spend more time on research finding the right photo than just finding a photo that sort of works
Mm.
and then try to manipulate it into what should work. So with this one, I think if you would have spent more time finding the one photo that has the right element of the height, that has the road maybe in the middle, because this is something you want to for storytelling, and then has consistent light throughout the city, and then you build up from there. So you always have a reference. So like there's your photo of the city that has already the light that I want in my painting, and anything that you add to it is always matched to that.
Mm.
So you basically work from a plate and then build up from there, and not from a empty canvas.
Yeah,
And I'll always have that in mind, you know.
that's something I teach as well. Is if you need 5 photos, if you think you approximately need 5 photos, then you should find 50, because you can't manipulate the photos anywhere near as much as you think you can, and usually that's how the guys who are working really quickly, they just downloading tons and tons of images and storing them in a folder, and then going and throwing it into Photoshop as quickly as possible, finding out what works and what doesn't. And the drawback of, even if like, let's say you're grabbing images from MattePaint.com, they're there, so you might think, well, I'll just leave the search open and download one, and then try that. But it's not the same as having a folder of files that you can just quickly drag in and delete. You end up trying too hard to make something that doesn't work. Sep, do you have those photos ready? I have to head off
Yeah,
in about 10 minutes.
yeah, they're coming through. They're coming through. So we should
Excellent.
let me share my screen here. Okay. So those are all photos from when I was in Hong Kong for Ghost in the Shell. I returned later for Skyscraper, so there are also a few photos from that.
Mm-hmm.
And not all of them are perfectly sharp, because they are mostly with my iPhone. It was an iPhone, I don't know, 6 at the time or something. Because obviously the main photos went all to Legendary Studios. Okay, do you see the screen? Is that?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is like, you're like here, we're here on a rooftop, and you're just in the financial district, and you see all this light that is going on and the glow on the buildings. So now this is not even a particular busy scene with a lot of the neon signs, but this is like a shot that you want to start as a base from, because you get already all the elements in there. You see the clouds lit up. This is exactly what I was talking about earlier. You see the lights in the streets, how bright the streets are. This is this important part, and then how dark the buildings get on the top very quickly. And then also like how the haze works out in the background, and how the lights really reflect on the water. So this is like a good example. So now this is still loading. So this is in Temple Market, looking into the Temple Market, and you see the busyness of what's going on there. In every single window looks different. Every window has a different color. The light pollution that is going on in the streets itself again as well, and also like all those imperfections. So this is also something I always say is like, there's not a single building in the world that is perfectly straight. It just doesn't exist. Every building, they do something and it's not perfectly straight. And you may think that a high rise is built that it's to perfection. No, it's not. None of them. And you can see that everywhere. So I hope that this picture loads in. Here we go. There we go. So there you can see how the stacking is happening of the buildings, how many lights there are, how different lights there are. And then this is obviously one of the biggest towers, goes through the clouds.
Mm.
You know, I haven't seen that in the submissions yet, where the buildings go through the clouds.
Yeah, that would be really cool to see.
Yeah. And then here, far in the distance, you see these are what we talked about earlier. There's the bay, there's the water, and then you see financial district here in the distance.
Mm.
Because this is Kowloon side, yeah. And then here, fully haze up. You don't even see anything because of pollution. So this is definitely pretty crazy. This is Temple Market as well, and also like back again. This is financial district in the distance, all super neon, and then on top, this is also something to consider, that the rooftops, they have no light.
Yes.
So the rooftops at night, they're all dark, they're black.
Oh,
like we went there with headlamps and flashlights to walk on the rooftops at night. There's absolutely no light on the top because no one sees it. Also something to consider, and also like obviously how the exposure is happening in this photo, and also the different colors in the sky of lights that are coming through. It's not just like that. You know, here the clouds are more magenta. There is a bit greenish. Here's blue. There's reds and mixed with other colors. You know, the sky has so many different colors. Yeah, it's all super interesting. And then yeah, obviously how it's all stacked together is like one next to the other. Pretty crazy environment there. This is like one of my favorite photos again. That building going into the clouds, and then you just see the lights piercing through on the top. It's super cool, and you tell a really good story there. And then all the clouds going around having different colors. Obviously, this is very difficult to achieve.
Yeah, different materials of the buildings as well. It's not all of like, you know, some of them glass, but some of them just different type of concrete, different age of the concrete, more worn out, less worn out. You can see there is a different everything.
Well, this is also a good point, because a city develops over time and over the years. So the center high rise here in the middle is obviously brand new. It's like less than 5 years old. But the buildings in the foreground, they're from the 60s or 70s. So back then in the 60s and 70s, everything was built in concrete, similar to what you see here in Vancouver. The old buildings are all concrete. New buildings from the 90s up to 2000s, they start to have glass. And so yeah, it really shows also like what architectural wise was possible to build. And this is what makes a city interesting. So when you look at something cyberpunk, you want to be able to see where is the old stuff and where's the new stuff, and you want to see the different types of how something was built. Because due to the limitations of technology, back in the 70s, they weren't able to build full glass high rises.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then like this is like looking into the bay, into the background. You know, you see then also how the light comes through to some like interesting clouds, and you know, these are just like some of the photos that I just quickly clicked on, so we get an idea. This is during daytime, one of the rare occasions that Hong Kong had a blue sky. Out of 9 weeks in Hong Kong, I saw this twice.
Wow.
Yeah, crazy. In the morning,
That's
when you're
crazy.
on the rooftops, and you see high rise, then you don't see the sun come through because the pollution kicks in first.
Yeah. Yeah, it's insane.
It's insane. Yeah, it's insane. Yeah, also like just like this busyness of this place. And this makes cyberpunk so difficult, because we're looking here at non-cyberpunk pictures. This is a real city, and already how much light detail is in here. And then so if you think cyberpunk, you are like 500% of that.
Yeah, yeah, and you've got to, when adding light to any kind of building, like even these, if you were adding a sign somewhere, there's so many elements that you need to take into consideration that are going to catch that light, and then cast shadows on other things, and it might override another light if it's more intense at that location. There's there's just so much. I mean, that's really what Alex was getting at the start, where this is such a complicated and challenging competition, because we're focusing on photorealism, and we're focusing on photography, using photography, and so yeah, it's very much, there's a lot of work to do. But I think in terms of, just to wrap up this thing, because we gotta stop the stream in a couple of minutes. I think in terms of helping people to get through to Friday, Saturday, depending on your time zone, when the competition closes, to have a look. I think we've got just under 6 days left. So my recommendation would be, see where you're at now, and remember that the most important thing is photorealism and actually achieving the cyberpunk look, which means magentas, cyans, lots of neon lights, lots of glowing, that sort of thing, and focus on making sure that your light interacts with the objects, at the very least with the objects immediately around it. And that may mean that you're scaling back some of the ideas that you had, just in order to bring what's there to the level that you can achieve in the next week. Sep, what would you say is your sort of recommendation for the next week of work?
Yeah, I think that now it's the time to push it, to give it all those elements, like add the right amount of glows to it, add all the signs to it, make sure that you get the colors, but don't overdo it either. You don't want to have and end up with a complete busy image and then you don't know where to look at. This is also the time where you want to, like, is there a story that I want to tell in my image, and like have the every matte painter in film, you want to have the attention drawn to a certain area in your picture. Like, are you able to have the eye draw from left to right or go in a little zigzag, like the standard composition that you are after? Like, where do I want the viewer to look at, and is this the area that someone is looking at first and then just explores the rest? So things like that. Composition, I think, if you get that going, and then you're already like halfway through there, even if the painting isn't perfect and if the colors aren't like matching up, but you tell a story, you get across to what you want to sell and tell, and you direct the audience to where you want it to look. I think you're winning big time.
Mm-hmm. And Alex?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I guess the only thing I could add to this is, it's yeah, last week I would just go over the image, see you need, or how can you bring it, to have a one consistent of composition, light, and the quality overall. So like, if your foreground is overworked, maybe it's scale that down foreground, but at the end you would have system, not just like you see, oh, okay, we started here, but we didn't have time to like half of the image because we're focused foreground or background element, or just left part, like right part. So just sort of method of progressive JPEG. It's like, when JPEG goes, or PNG, you can, at every stage you can see the image, just different type of the quality and different type of the quality, yeah, like clarity of the
Details.
image and details much. But at every step you pretty much kind of like see the whole image together, and tell, it's like zooming back, thumbnail, my thumbnail is working, or really need and see all those details, but bigger scale is.
Your microphone's starting to drop out,
Oh, sorry.
Alex, but yeah, like we were still able to make out what you're saying.
Sorry about.
That's right. Cool. All right. Well, thanks for joining me, guys. I have to head off really
Okay.
quickly. But it's been really good. Zoe saw the feedback. She said she agrees with everything we said, and it will be interesting to see where she takes that in the next week. For everyone who's watching, if you can hit the thumbs up buttons and subscribe to MattePaint if you're interested in getting notified about future live streams. We will likely have a live stream for the finalists, and we'll be reviewing the sort of the finalist submissions. So stay tuned and keep watching for that notification. Other than that, we're always in Discord. We're all happy to give feedback at all times. So definitely, make use of that. And good luck with the rest of the contest. Cool.
Yep.
See you guys.